Hi guys, it's Tammy again with Pretty Presets. I'm going to continue on with my editing boudoir images this week for the Pretty Takeover. I do have a little bit of a cold, so I sound a little bit strange, but I'm just gonna go on anyways. So this is in our first video. I'll click right over here. In our first video, this was the image that we edited. If you want to go back and find that, I'm sure you can find it on our YouTube or a link within Pretty Actions or Pretty Presets, because I use both Pretty Actions and Pretty Presets when I am editing boudoir. So this was the before and this was the after, and then I'm moving on here, and then I'll have another edit of this third photo down here coming up next. So the very first thing that I do, I'm going to jump right in, is straighten. You can tell this line right here is a little bit crooked. I feel like it's leaning to the right. So instead of going into my crop and messing with all the angles, I come right here to my transform and I hit auto, and it just straightens it out really nicely, and I'm happy with that. Then I am going to come up here to my second step. Something I always do is the heal and clone. I do have it set to heal because clone tends to be too strong. So I hit the Z key to zoom in, but I just want to be at 1:1 here. And I'm going to touch up these little imperfections. Just like I've said in other videos, touching up like moles or beauty marks or freckles or something that you need to talk to your client about, whether or not they like them. This particular client was fine with me taking out anything that I felt like taking out. So the reason I do this part of the editing first is because once you've done the skin smooth, it can be a little bit more difficult to blend in these little selections. And when you see these pop up and down, I'm using the H key on my keyboard, and that will hide it and then show it again. Because sometimes like this, that's very difficult sometimes to make a new selection. So hit H, it hides it, and then you can make a new selection wherever you need to. Especially on places like the forehead, where I'm going to be removing these lines. It's very convenient to use that H key. Then I'm going to come right here, get this little spot, and this can be a little bit time consuming. It's definitely worth it though. It's something that you want to do, at least for this style of editing. I know there's lots of different styles, but for my style of editing, I want to retouch all of these little things that I would not want to see in my own professional boudoir photo that I would hope would be taken out. So these lines starting to get somewhere now. I'm just going to keep taking them out, keep choosing the spot that I want, adjusting it when I don't like where Lightroom selected. This line right here. And you want to be careful with repeating patterns when you clone. That's what you don't want to do. You want to make sure that you're not getting the same spots over and over, because that's what will catch somebody's eye in a clone. And I know lots of people use the cloning in Photoshop, and that's fine. If you're comfortable doing that or you already know how to do it, that's fine. But you don't have to use Photoshop. You can use Lightroom. I'm sure there's some things that are maybe easier in Photoshop, but I find this tool in Lightroom to be plenty for most things. I am also going to take out this line here because in person that line wasn't actually that strong. I think it was kind of catching the shadow a little bit, so I'm going to take that out. I'm going to get this over here, these few little dots, freckles, whatever you want to call them. Okay, I'm using the space bar. We'll pull up the hand so you can move your screen. Just another little shortcut that I like to use. Hide those again so I can double check. Okay, I think I am satisfied with that amount of touch-up. We've got the lines, we've got the few tiny blemishes. I am going to hit my brush tool And I'm going to use fixed casts of red, which I believe that was either from one of the baby sets or the portrait set. It might be in the portrait retouch set, but I use that set a lot because very often men, because they're not wearing makeup and they're not wearing sunscreen, they have a redder like face usually than women. So a lot of times when I'm doing portraits or couples, I use that red brush a lot. So, sorry, close that. Okay. So I've done all the touch-up that I think I'm happy with. There's not any large amount of shadow that I want to deal with. There's not anything blown out or over-processed that I want to deal with, which are some things that I usually do. I don't want to take it into Photoshop with the highlights blown out or with really dark shadows because the smoothing brush doesn't tend to work as well. But I think this is all lit pretty well. So I'm going to hit Command E. And that is going to pop it over into Photoshop for you. It takes a second sometimes, but it will go over there. There we go. Pops up. And I'm going to be using Smooth as a Baby's Bottom in Pretty Actions, the Luxe Newborn set. There is also a smoothing brush in a couple of the other sets in Pretty Actions, but the baby one is kind of just one that I like. So I'm going to click it. I'm going to hit play, continue. It's going to do its, run its programs here. Okay, and as soon as that's opened up right here, you can see that you can open up, anytime there's a file with an arrow, you can open it up right here and see what's in it and change what's in it. As well as changing the overall, you can specifically change the reds, the tone, the softener, and the smoother. So then I'm going to hit B because that's my brush tool, and I'm going to use my keyboard to change the size of that. I'm set to 100% up here on my brush, and even if that might be too much, I can still change that with the opacity over on the right. So I'm going to leave my brush at 100. And I'm just going to do a brush. I don't want to get it on the edge of her outfits. I don't want to get it on hair or lips or makeup, eye makeup, that kind of stuff, but I want to get it onto the hand. You don't ever want to forget hands and feet. You want everything to be smooth. I'm going to come down here. Even though this is out of focus with depth of field, I still want to smooth over it. The arm here. And you can also see, while I'm brushing this on, you might be able to see that it's also changing the color of her skin just a little bit. It's warming it just a little bit and a little bit of like a pink tone, which is probably what you want when you're editing most newborns or babies, which is what this set is for. But I am actually going to turn that off right here. And what that is healthy tone. And I'm going to click that off because I like the tone that she is. So I'm going to leave that. And I'm just going to continue smoothing on. I don't want to go over the crack of her arm right there, but I just went around it. Make sure up here onto the neck, the shoulder, and then we're going to do the face right here. And be sure to keep it off the eyebrows. You can get close to the hairline, but don't go over. Smooth all this around the eye. And I do usually like to kind of get up here in that roundness of the eye and get that smoothed. And then down onto the tip, but don't go over the edge of the nose. Down here on the chin. And I don't know, it's hard to kind of explain. You want to be careful, you know, you want to make sure that you're getting it on the right place, but you also don't need to be absolutely sort of crazy. You know, you don't need to scroll in super far and get every single little pixel. As long as you're pretty darn close, you're going to be fine. And you can tell if you went over something too far, you can see it. It's noticeable. So don't be concerned that it needs to take you an hour to do the skin smoothing. It really should not take that long. So hit your Z again and you can zoom back, which sometimes is easier because when you're up really close, sometimes you can feel like it didn't really work, but then you zoom back and you realize, oh, it did, and it is nice and smooth. So when you come back is when you really can check out the overall look. I'm thinking right now, I'm looking and I'm deciding if I'm needing to use my filter tool up here, the Liquify tool, which is something that I use a lot in Boudoir. But I think, you know what I'm going to use it a tiny bit right here. So I'm going to flatten, I'm going to hit OK, and then I'm going to hit filter and liquify. If you do not flatten before you use liquify, it doesn't work. I don't want to get all into why it doesn't work, but it doesn't. It will pull up different layers and you can't do it. So make sure that you're flattening. And yes, I realize that her arm is lovely and fine, but this is something that she may look at and not like, that her arm looks like it's sort of smushing. So I'm just barely going to just tiny take in that area that looks like it was somewhat smushed out more than the rest. And I am in this top little tool here, the push, and I think that's the only spot I'm going to do. I'm just going to do right there. I already took it in as much as I want, and I'm going to hit OK. So I don't need to flatten that again, unless I created another layer, which I didn't. Another thing I am going to do, though, is come down here to her eyes, and I'm going to come down to the Pretty Actions Makeup Retouch. There you are. I'm going to hit Pretty Eyes, and I'm going to hit play. And then I'm going to open it here because, once again, we've got our file. I want to whiten the whites. That is one thing I want to do. So I need to make this smaller. And it's nothing extreme, and that's good because you don't want extreme. It starts to look a little bit like crazy Halloween or a doll. So use whitening the whites sparingly. And then I am going to hit bold color here. And I'm just going to do that on the colored area of her eyes. Just a little bit, right where the green is. And then I am also going to do clarity. And with that, I'm going to get sort of on all of it right here. And even maybe a tiny bit onto the lashes. Not crazy, not onto the skin, but just a little bit. Okay, and I'm going to hit layer again and flatten. You always want to flatten your image before you send it back to Photoshop. So we are going to zoom back out here a little so you can see how that kind of just popped her eyes out a little bit. We still want them kind of dark and mysterious, but we don't want them too dark that we can't see them. So Command S is going to send it. See right down here, you can see it saving, and it's going to send it back to Lightroom for us. So now this second one will pop up right next to our original. So this was, right here was after our little bit of touch up, but before we took it to Photoshop. And then here is after we smoothed it and adjusted the arm and adjusted her eyes. I'm going to come in a little bit. There we go. I'm going to use a radial filter to just add a little bit more light to her eyes right here. I'm going to adjust it so it just hits here where I want it. And hit done. I'm going to zoom in a little further, and I'm going to touch up. I don't really like this line between here and the darker under her eyes, so I'm going to try and smooth that just a little bit. Okay, so let me see where it picked. Let me grab that and bring it back. And when you touch up under the eye with this kind of thing, you want to keep your selection area right here under the eye. And also a lot of times I will turn the opacity of that down, just because I want to soften it. I don't want it to look strange. So I'm going to soften these lines right here a little bit. And over here, there's a couple little spots that I want to touch up a little further than we did when I did it before we went over there. Sometimes the smoothing takes out some of this stuff, and sometimes you get it back in here and go, oh, I'd like it a little bit smoother. And that's fine. You can still touch it up. But I would recommend doing the major stuff first, just because after smoothing, it can be more difficult to blend it in sometimes in some areas. Let me see. Okay, and right here, I feel like I have a little bit of a repeating pattern. I might not be able to see it on your screen, but I can here. So I want to make sure that I'm not having any little repeats from when we touched it up earlier. I'm going to touch this up. Okay. Hit done. Yeah, I think that looks nice. The only other thing that is kind of standing out to me is right here on her bone. It seemed to have a little shadow behind it, so I'm going to see if I can get rid of that a little bit. Let me see how that looks. Okay, yeah, I like that better. Okay, so I'm going to hit fit again. So now that I've got everything feeling like it's touched up, I could mess with the crop now if I wanted. I might bring it in a little, although I like that she's kind of more to the left. I don't want her to be completely centered, so I think I'm okay with that. So now is when you're going to mess with your presets. I always really like the Freesia, but I think it's a little bit too soft for this photo. I think I want something a little bit more bold. So Juniper is always good. Sassy. Oh yeah, I like Sassy right there. Perfect. Love that. It warmed it up, but not too much. And I think that if I wouldn't have turned off the toning and the warming in Photoshop, this probably would have warmed her skin too much, but that's another reason that I like to turn it off over there, because I'd rather let the preset deal with sort of my white balance and the tone of their skin over here in Lightroom. So I like that. I'm happy with that. I don't feel like it needs to be lit. This is nice. I might take my brush tool here, and it's on lighten, and come down the center of the thigh and bring a little light to it, and then right over here where the light is already hitting it. And I'm going to hit new and do it again. And this is a way to just sort of bring attention to the parts that you want attention. I don't want to darken any of the shadows, but this would be considered like a dodge and burn, but I'm not going to do any burning. I'm just doing a little bit of dodge. Hit it right here on her hand. I'm going to hit new one more time and do this here one more time. And the same thing, you can hit hide and it will hide those pins if they're bothering you. So I'm going to hit done, and I am happy with that. I'll click you back over here. This is the first time. We have already done some of the retouch here, but not all of it. So that was semi where we started. And then this edit is where we ended, and that was super fast, and I know you can do it, and I hope that that helps. I hope that it inspires you to maybe get into Photoshop if you haven't started using it. It was this kind of thing that got me over into Photoshop and doing like sky swaps and doing just little things. I learned how to do little things when I needed it for a certain photo, and then all of those little things turned into a pretty good knowledge of Photoshop that I'm pretty happy with. So once again, this was the photo from our first editing video. This is the photo from the second one, and then we are going to move on here to this third photo for my next editing video this week during the Pretty Presets and Pretty Actions takeover. So get on the forum, and if you have any specific questions about these edits or editing your own photos or need some help or some inspiration on how to edit, let me know on there, and I will be on there this week and I will be able to help you. So thanks. Hope to see you there.